The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Okay, welcome back to the Retro Rangers podcast. I'm your host, George Grimm, and my co-host this evening is Marc Weissman, and we are pleased to welcome back our analytic analyst, Wyatt Unger, and we're going to talk about the first round of the playoffs. Okay, gentlemen, thanks for coming by on rather short notice. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Okay. All right, so let's get started with the Rangers. What the hell happened?
I think just a lot that I predicted, honestly. If you go back to what I said a couple weeks ago when we did the prediction podcast, I mean, the Devils having a speed advantage, like you would think the Rangers zeroing in on them for a 7-game series, and it's not, a regular season schedule where one game here, one game there. Like, you're only focusing on the Devils, and you still couldn't solve that problem. Right. To me, was just pathetic. The analytics for the series completely tilted on the Devils' side in, I think, 6 out of the 7 games. Just gruesome to watch. Like I said, the only hope the Rangers had was in the goaltending difference, and maybe in the experience. The experience didn't even play any factor at all for the Rangers. And, once Vanacek was gone and Schmid, a more capable goalie, was in, and, go to the power play, I think they finished under 5% after game 2. At that point, where do the Rangers have an advantage? They're not a faster team. They're not a better forechecking team. They don't create as many opportunities. They don't spend as much time in the zone. Where did the Rangers have an advantage over the Devils after game 2? They didn't, and, that's kind of why they lost 4 out of 5.
Yeah, but, they lost so badly. I mean, it wasn't even close. They didn't even put up a fight. I kind of thought it was going to be a long series, which it was. It was 7 games, but I expected, maybe an overtime or so, but there was just nothing, no fight in the Rangers at all after a while, and I'm wondering, did the Rangers overreach at the trading deadline? Did they destroy team whatever chemistry they had in the team?
I don't think so. I think that repairing the kid line as a third line was a great idea. Tarasenko was just what they needed. They needed someone to score because at that time they were actually creating opportunities, but no one was there to finish them. And then they go out and get Kane, who is sort of like, Kucherov, where, oh yeah, that guy can play make, but he's got a really good shot. I think that the Rangers built the best team they could have built. But again, I feel like they quit so many times watching them. I just feel like, they quit, and, it's no quit in New York. I think there was quit. Yeah.
What do you think, Marc?
Well, a couple things. I got to say, I didn't think. First of all, I didn't think going into it that the Devils would be as superior. So hats off to you, Wyatt, for calling that. The other thing is, regardless of how we thought things were going to go in, it almost would have made more sense, or it would have been a little more understandable if they didn't look so good those first 2 games. But I think the experience factor, you could say, probably or lack of on the Devil side, probably played a role, which is why we not only beat them, we beat them on the road, and I think they were a little overwhelmed. And I think what became apparent was how well Lindy Ruff adjusted to our game and how not so well Gallant adjusted to the Devils game. Mm-hmm. I think that the combination of those 2 things is a large part of why I think the game, or the series, I should say, turned around. And as far as the trade deadline goes, the exact same thing, the exact same thoughts were done last year. In other words, we made all those changes. We got Kopp, Mott, Vetrano, and the first thing people said was, "What's that going to do to our chemistry? How is it going? How are things going to work?" And it was almost seamless. When you think about it, they came in and did everything. Those players, while they weren't necessarily the most talented players, Vetrano was brought in as a shooter, and that's what he did. And Kopp filled top 6 or at times the top 9 gap, and Mott did what he did this year. Provide solid, fourth line checking and PK. So the same concerns were this year, but my feeling is, and I know I'm not alone in this, the Rangers brought in, I agree, they brought in Tarasenko, and that was a good pickup, but they really didn't address all the deficiencies that they had as far as being tougher, being grittier, being playoff ready. They brought in yet another skilled player, of which they had plenty already. And and not only that, a skilled player who was on the downside of his career and had injury concerns that are probably valid. At least I almost hope they were, given how he played. So that to me was the thing. It's almost like Drury, did everything right last year's deadline, and then kind of undermined everything that we were working towards this year, as opposed to filling the right gaps and making us we ended up to be a very one-dimensional team outside of the fourth line. I mean, the third line, obviously, the kid line didn't really contribute the way they did last year. So we had 2 skilled lines and a fourth grinding line, and it just wasn't enough, and we basically got overwhelmed after the first 2 games.
What about coaching? Do you think the Rangers are due for a coaching change?
I'm going to say no. I put down a couple of reasons here. First of all, I don't see any improvements based on the market. Nobody knows if Barry Trotz wants to coach again. Anaheim fired Dallas Eakins. He might be the worst coach that we've seen in the National Hockey League the last 5 years. Darryl Sutter killed the Calgary Flames. Peter Laviolette fired by Washington. From what I have snuffed out from social media, just about every fan of Washington is more than thankful for that move. So I think it just comes down to, how much. I think it's, the same as the Yankees when they fail, everyone goes to Boone, everyone rags on Boone. But I think that Gallen is very similar to Boone, where he does, really all he can. And I feel like, we just discussed the lack of effort on the players. I don't think that's due to Gallen at all. I think he's always going, when he was hired, the main message was, he's always going to get the most out of his players, and he's going to push his players. And that's always been evident so far. That was evident many times throughout the season when he scratched Lafreniere, when he scratched Kakko in last year's postseason. He'll get that message sent, and it was received, and then it was almost like, it would work, and then all of a sudden the effort would die down. And I feel like, again, I think it's just more on the players because, when he would make the line changes during the season, they work for a couple games. Not only are they winning games, they're outplaying teams, they're creating more chances, they're being a better defensive team. And then all of a sudden, they die down. It's like they're already figured out. And I feel like, again, that's got to be on the players. I don't know how much it can be on Gallant. And, especially like you look at his system, I don't really know. It's not like every line follows the same system. Otherwise, the top 6 would be, clearing the puck. They wouldn't be looking for controlled exits in the defensive zone, which is something I've preached all year. They need to follow suit with the bottom 6, how they do that. So I think that, there's not much we're gonna be able to improve with on the coaching front. I would, and really Gallen is kind of limited because you look at this team. There's so many different types of players. There's, you have veterans like Tarasenko and Kane. You have defensive liabilities like Panarin. You have power forwards. You have grinders. There's too much of a mix to really commit to something. But I think if they were to Tarasenko and Kane go, I think a forechecking system would work really well, like what Carolina and Jersey runs, because then, the average speed of this team goes up.
How about you, Mark? What do you think?
Well, I honestly, I'm not sure if I really agree with, any of that assessment of the coaching. The first thing that I guess makes me think is just because there's nobody better out there doesn't mean that keeping it's like that doesn't really warrant or justify or defend the way Gallant coached. In a way, to me, if that's the case, it's almost a shame because I think it was pretty evident that you mentioned Wyatt about benching, taking action. He didn't do it. I didn't see that. In other words, to me, there were times during this series where I wanted to see him make. You only have 2 weeks to figure things out. It's not like the regular season. I didn't see a lot of either adjustments or, really going into the playoffs itself. I was baffled when Tarasenko wasn't put on the power play. I mentioned that in our preview, and he finally did that in Game 6. And while it was great, all I kept thinking was, well, why didn't that happen in Game 3 or Game 4? And that's just the power play, which really, in the grand scheme of things, yes, you can win a series or even a cup on the power play, but 90% of a game is usually at even strength. So if you're deficient in 5-on-5, you can sometimes have the greatest power play in the world, and it's not going to necessarily get you through. But I felt like there was that. Now I know that he probably doesn't always say publicly what he says to the players behind closed doors, and that's true of any coach. But what we did hear him say was a lot of, hey, it's up to the players, whatever they want to do. How do you want to? It felt like It's like a hands-off manager where there was a lot of delegation and there was a lot of deferral, especially of course to the veterans, and I understand that. But when the veterans are not performing or not leading, it's time for management, in this case the coach, to step in and do something. And I just feel like there wasn't enough urgency on his part that to correct things or try things, make things differently, stop, somehow tell these guys, look, you have to stop with the east-west passing because the Devils are just so quick. And even though we all knew that going in, it looked like it wasn't getting through to them. They were just constantly doing the same thing, same mistakes, and there was no accountability. There wasn't even a mini benching during a game or something like that. I think when they went from 2-0 to 2-2 and then 3-2, you're basically on the cusp of blowing a series that you had, regardless of who was favored going into it. So right. you gotta do something. Call a timeout. There's a lot of things that I feel like we're missing. Now, again, if this is the best we can do, or there's nobody better, and all, that's a different story, and that's up to jury to figure out. But to me, it's not a slam dunk that, oh yeah, we're definitely keeping on. I just think there's a lot of question marks, just like there's a lot of question marks with some of the players as well.
Yeah. After Game 5, he had changed the lines. Lafreniere was with Trocheck and Kane, Tarasenko back with Kreider and Zibanejad, Panarin with Hito and Kakko. And Game 6 was, both, well, I don't want to say on the score sheet, it was 5-1 like Game 1 and Game 2. But that was, if you talk about limiting the Devils and, creating more in their own zone, that was the best they played all series. And so obviously you keep those lines in Game 7. They think the inner slot shots were 11-1. Just anything you can go by to measure how dominant one team was over the other in Game 7. The Devils had it by a landslide. So again, it's like at the end of the day, you can't blame them for keeping those lines going into Game 7, and then they go ahead and just get pounded. I don't think. And said with Tarasenko, he put him on the power play. He dropped Kane down. And we did not score a power play goal with Tarasenko on the top unit. So, again, I don't know what really – I think it's just pretty easy to go after Gallant. Sometimes I'll admit I've done the same thing with Aaron Boone with the Yankees, but in this instance, I don't even think I can, just kind of sugarcoat the issues that the team itself has and just go after Gallant.
Oh, I agree. I would never, George asked us, what do you think about the coach? So, but if he asked me, what do I think about, Panarin, or, I would go up on them too. I'm not saying anybody, there's a lot of people that are not absolved of accountability, responsibility. So that just had to do with, what we were talking about at that point. But the thing is, you're right. He made those changes. But to me, if all of those changes had happened earlier in the series, I think it might have gone differently. I think you make it, even if you make the right change, if it's in game 6 or 7, then, you don't have a lot of, there's not a lot of, you're not as relaxed. You're not as like, oh, it's game 2, the game 3 and it's 2-0, or it's game 4 and it's 2-1. Mentally you can sort of mesh or do the right thing. But when you suddenly put things together in what was, I agree, those were the right moves to make. Hedl and Panarin played very well at times during the season. Kakko was one of the best forwards the whole series, so putting him with Kreider and Mika was a great idea. I mean, I was in support of that, but like I said before, it was like, it's game 6. Like, where was this in game 3 or game 4? That's my only thing. It was just
well, they went up 2-0, so I guess that's the curse of blowing a 2-0 lead. You're not going to make those changes early because you just played 2 really great hockey games, and I don't know how you can change that. Although I will say, it could have come a game earlier. I don't disagree there because game 3 was very ugly as far as scoring chances. Game 4 was a little bit closer, but I think at that point, you lose 2. The power play isn't looking great. I think at that point you have to change the power play without a doubt, and you can mess a little bit with the lines. At that point, change who Zibanejad is playing with, as well as bumping down Panarin, because if he's off the score sheet, he is the worst player on the ice because we know his defensive struggles. So yeah, I think that you're right that the changes could have come maybe a game earlier, but we can't really do much in game 3 after we just went up 2-0 in their place.
Right, that's a good point, and I think it also, in a way, it lulled us into a false sense of security because as far as the power play goes, because anyone who's been watching this team and watching the Zibanejad all year, everybody was just baffled why suddenly he was not in the circle like he'd been all year, where he scored 20 goals. And what happened was, that we did pretty well on the power play with Kane and things like that, but that doesn't, and that probably was what made it hard to change that point. But I still think had we kept Zibanejad over there, he doesn't even have to score. He had a couple shots early in the series. He'll injure a guy. I mean, if you go to block him and you make a guy who's hurt, well, now you have an advantage from that standpoint. And it also starts to open up the right side of the ice and the slot and things like that. So it's not just about, whether he scores from there or not. He's either scoring or he's a decoy. So
yeah, there was a time, probably like 3/4 mark of the season, a little bit after the All-Star break, where like a bunch of games in a row, instead of shooting, you saw him make those one-touch passes right to Kreider for a tip-in, right. And obviously, that would have been a little bit harder to pull off in the playoffs, especially after Kreider was, getting more attention, and then obviously in the first 2 games, you wouldn't change anything about how the power play went. But I think, they could have. There was too much potential in plays that they could establish on that power play. There's too many options to go out there and only look for about 3 of them.
Right, you're right. And Fox not shooting. I mean, not just on the power play. I mean, when you think about his Norris Trophy season and last year, he's an excellent passer. He's an outstanding passer, and he's great at keeping the puck in. But it's not like he never shot. I mean, think about how many wrist shots, goals, or even backhand goals he had. And then, like, all of a sudden, late, it started even late in the season. It wasn't just in the playoffs. And then, yesterday was sort of the tip of it, or the top of the iceberg or whatever, where he was wide open in the slot for almost like 5 or 6 seconds, and shooting seemed to be the last thing on his mind. That's, to me, that's the more he shoots or even attempts a shot, again, then they're going to start playing the shot, and then he'll have a bit more success passing. And just, it's the same thing with Panarin. If he doesn't shoot, then you just play the pass on him, and it becomes very easy to predict what these guys are doing. So all of that, to me, it's all one big philosophy change, and yes, it's on the players, but a coach can guide and sort of ease players to encourage them to do things that or discourage them from doing the wrong thing. You could do it either way. You could take positive reinforcement, which I think Gallant is good at, but I think sometimes you got to take some drastic measures and if things are not going, because it just doesn't seem like it was sinking in at times.
Okay, I have as far as coaching candidates, I have a couple names that aren't available right now, but they might be. One is Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh. He may be available soon if Pittsburgh changes a lot of their management. And the other one would be the guy down in Florida, Joe Quenneville. Now I know he's kind of got like a suspension going from the NHL because of the sexual harassment case a few years ago. But as far as I read in an article, he wants to come back, and Gary Bettman is open to having him come back into the league, but he has to be approached by him, and so he might be available. They've both won Stanley Cups, and they're both very good coaches. What do you think about them?
I think Quenneville is an interesting option there. I think if they were going to look at changes, if they were willing to, bring on the controversy of Quenneville and his past, if they want to let that by, I think, that's something that could work out. He was huge for those early 2010s Blackhawks. That goes without saying. You win 3 cups, you probably have a great coach. I think that'd be a pretty good option. And if he was the new Ranger coach in October, I personally love that. As for Sullivan, though, I kind of watched him put Jeff Carter on the third line and give him like 15, 16 minutes a game all year. So for me, that alone almost makes it a no. I mean, he made a ton of puzzling lineup moves with Pittsburgh all year, and it just, to those fans, didn't seem like he's really the same. And it could be, a talent thing with Pittsburgh. It's not like they haven't gotten worse. But I don't know if I would really be very enthusiastic about Mike Sullivan being the Rangers coach. But yeah, Quenneville, I would definitely, I wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, I guess I could see both coaches, being upgrades in a lot of ways from a lot right now. Sullivan obviously was an assistant coach to Tortorella, and I think he, a lot of times, same thing kind of happened with Lindy Ruff, is that, the assistants get kind of lumped in. If the head coach is being let go, then, the entire team is let go, and it may not be a reflection on, the entire staff. And that's what we're seeing, I think, with Ruff and with ended up seeing with Sullivan. The thing is, it's when I think about Pittsburgh, he had not that any coach could do the same thing, but he had, a guy like Sidney Crosby on his bench that he could just put out there. And I don't think we have somebody like that. No. At least we don't have anybody like that now. Obviously we got Kane 5 years ago, or even Panarin, when he was younger. Maybe it's a different story. But so that, you're only as good as your, great coaches are made by great goaltenders and great players. And the same thing could be said for Quenneville when he had, Kane and Taves, in their absolute prime, both future Hall of Famers. There's really there's no future Hall of Famers on the Rangers right now. So maybe, it's early for, some of them, but so I think that's the evaluation of the coach has to be, or has to be looked at in context with what they had to, at their disposal team-wise. And the only other thing I would say is regarding the controversy with Quenneville, you think about it, there was wasn't as recent, but there was some similar controversy bringing Kane here about his past. And, I think that's, you have to do your due diligence if you're Chris Drury or any GM, but, it's different, sometimes different city, different players, different management, different corporation or different organization, and, they can handle things differently. And I think if he's, and how many times you have people, somebody who's considered whatever it's called, cancer in the locker room or a coach, and then they go to another city and, you wouldn't even know. So, in that sense, he might be worth the risk and have the, given, the pedigree that he has, cup-wise. So.
Yeah. Okay. Just throwing those names out there. Okay, now how about the rest of the conference? We had Florida upsetting Boston, and the Canes over the Islanders, and the Leafs over the Lightning. What are your thoughts about those three series?
So first with Carolina, this went exactly as I thought and exactly as I said on our playoff preview podcast. The Canes are just a much better team, even with all their injuries. The combination of Sorokin and Sorokin and Ranta kind of gave the Islanders a couple games. I perfectly what I put on my bracket, Canes in 6. Sorokin was going to make it tough for Carolina to score, but it was still going to happen because, no goalie just doesn't crack under that many scoring chances. And I think that I was really disappointed with Barzal and Horvat because the whole thing is, these guys, look what they did when Barzal was healthy, and now he's back, and they just got completely neutralized by a third line. So as for Bruins-Panthers, taking a huge victory on this one because I can track down so many times where I said this wasn't going to be easy for Boston. They're not as good of a team as 65 wins or anywhere close, really. But I'm not going to act like I wasn't surprised at all to watch it happen. And it's such an embarrassing fashion, too. I was at Game 3 in person. It was ugly. Bruins took over the building, as I'm sure they did in Game 4, after Game 4, I almost didn't want to watch the rest of the series because it was ugly, and I was going to be upset if I saw Boston win, but I happened to not be upset for the rest of the series, so that was pretty nice. And then lastly, Toronto. Congrats to them. I was not alive the last time they won a series, so it's definitely something. I thought.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, and then by Game 4, it wasn't just the fact that they were up 3-1, because in the back of my head it's like, okay, if any team does this, it's Tampa, and if any team coughs up a 3-1 lead, it's Toronto. But I feel like at that point, the difference between this year and all the other years is that the Toronto players, they actually believed in themselves. And I think that a huge part of that is the fact that in the past, Toronto's veteran leadership players like Wayne Simmons, Jason Spezza, Nick Foligno, they're on the third and fourth line. They're not contributing. They're gonna block shots, lay hits, defend the Stars, but they're not going to do much. They're not going to get on the score sheet. But having a guy like Ryan O'Reilly, who was an absolute anchor all series long, that is honestly, between that and, finally getting quality goaltending from Samsonov, that was, to me, what really got this done. Just having that experience, also be able to be productive, so you're not necessarily wasting a roster spot on a protection guy. I think that did so much for them, so much that they won the series.
That's a good assessment, Wyatt. I definitely I think I agree as far as the Canes and the Islanders. That pretty much went the way most people thought, including myself. I do remember on the preview that we did that I said I felt like everything is just so in the Bruins' favor of this, that the first thing I thought of was I can't help but thinking of Tampa being upset by Columbus. Anything can happen. that kind of thing. And then, but then, under the same breath, I said, but how do you not pick the Bruins to win the series? You can't. It's like playing the lottery if you were going to pick the Panthers. So, but the Panthers just kind of hung in there and took advantage of a lot of things that again, regular season play and playoff hockey is different, and that's not a revelation for anybody. And the statistics of the President's Trophy and as opposed to Cup winners is very well known, and that there really is very little correlation there. But it's one thing to win the President's Trophy by a few points, 5 or 10 points. Another thing to set all-time records of wins and things like that, and then still lose. So that's a little tough. And then the Toronto-Tampa series, I think you make a good point. They had their leaders, their key people, were also their production people. I think that's a really good point, because you could have. I'll give you an example. Like I thought Trouba, for example, for us was a fabulous captain. He was my pick going into the season, and I thought he did exactly what a captain's supposed to do, as far as pick the team up when they were down and keep things in line, and good with the media, all that kind of stuff. But you wouldn't necessarily call him the number one defenseman on the team. So, right. So you know what I mean? So it's a little, sometimes it's tough to do that. But sometimes it's the right call, because leadership, the most talented player on the team doesn't necessarily deserve a letter, an A, let alone a C. That's, I can think of like Marian Gaborik never wore a letter. And he was at times our most talented player. So I could see where that's somewhat of a limitation, even though I'm sure there have been Cup champions who have, non-elite players or non-scoring, leaders. Scott Stevens comes to mind with the Devils. But if you do have that, if your leaders are your top players, and you have a guy like you said, Ryan O'Reilly, who's, not only won a Cup but was Conn Smythe winner, that's just, you can't really replace or do any better than somebody like that, who can really contribute in the room, on the bench, on the ice, in tough situations, all of that. So all that put together, and Tampa, is getting a little older. They kind of had their run, and they may or may not, come back from this, but everything was sort of set up to have Toronto do what they did.
Yeah, Tampa has actually played a lot of games over the last few seasons, regular season and playoffs. So it wears down some of the older players sometimes.
Yeah.
So. All right, let's look ahead to the next round. We have Toronto and Florida, New Jersey and Carolina, Seattle and Dallas, and Vegas and Edmonton. What's who's picking who? Yeah.
So start up with Toronto, who I think they're actually playing right now. Started about a half hour ago. I don't think that they did what they just did to lose now. I feel like, and this is more just gut feeling than basing off of real stuff here. But it feels like once the Leafs won 4 games, they're destined for 16 almost. I think Samsonov and Bobrovsky are very similar. They can win you a game and they can lose you a game. Differences with the talent level, and not even talent, just the level of play that both teams, you can expect from both teams. It would just take a performance from Sergei Bobrovsky that you just can't reliably predict to happen. So I think I'll take Toronto here. It's going to be a very fun series, a lot of goals. But I think Toronto patched up their weak spots, and Florida did not have the cap space or assets too. So I'll also say this goes 6 games. And for the other East matchup, Canes and Devils, they were the 2 best analytical teams in the regular season. But, Schmid is much better than whatever the Canes will put out, whether it be Ronta or Anderson. I doubt Kochetkov gets the nod. And not to mention, Teravainen's out, Svechnikov's out, Nate is a little banged up. How many times are the Canes going to light the lamp this series? Islanders had, and this is the huge difference maker to me, the Islanders had one line, with real talent, Barzal, Horvat, and Lee, and was neutralized by the Stahl line. But the Devils have three really high-quality lines, especially an amazing top six, and that line, Stahl line, is not going to triple shift, so I think it's going to be a lot harder to shut them down. I think that this was, about December, I thought this was the Canes' year because, we're fully healthy. That's just a monstrous lineup. But I'm going to take the Devils here, and I'll say 6. I think 7 can happen. But I think just regardless, we're in for a long series, and I think we're in for a long series with all 4 of these. But moving on to the West, Stars, Kraken. I think that, missing McCann and Burakovsky is just going to be really tough for the Kraken. They rely on their depth. That's what got them there. It's what got them past Colorado. But the difference is Colorado didn't have the depth either. The whole going into it, Makar, Rantanen, McKinnon, you're going to have to face in 25 minutes a night, and it's going to be difficult. But Dallas, they have those big 3 guys in Robertson, Hintz, and Heiskanen, but they also have a lot more depth scoring, 3 quality lines, solid defense, not to mention, Jake Ottinger, who is, no big deal, but he's putting up some of the best numbers we've seen from a postseason goalie. So I think that, it's just too much for Seattle to handle. But can't really, on the flip side, don't want to count them out because we saw what that did last time, but I'll take Dallas in 6. And then lastly, Oilers Vegas, going to be my favorite series, the one I just zone in on. Think that this is interesting because Vegas has a better defense in LA, so that would be able to neutralize them a little bit. And, Vegas is also going to get defensive help from their forwards, something Edmonton can't say. And, you bring up the power play, and Edmonton still had 15 5-on-5 goals against the Kings, but Vegas is the least penalized team in the NHL, and they still, when they do take penalties, they have a really good penalty kill. So I think Vegas matches up against Edmonton better than any team does. I know Shea Theodore was dealing with an illness. He'll be back. Braden McNabb, probably not, but just having one of those guys is huge. So, still concerned with Vegas' goalie, but it's not like Stuart Skinner's a guarantee. So I think I'm going to go with Vegas in 7 here.
How about you, Mark?
Well, starting in the East and starting really Devils, Canes, I think a lot of what Wyatt said I agree with. That I think the Devils are a little more diverse, a little more just, like I said, they have more firepower or just more energy up and down their forward lineup. The only thing about Carolina, when I think about when we played them, when the Rangers played them during the year, they as a team had a very good system in shutting down, I guess what the time was, a high-powered offense or a skill-based team. So I could see. I mean, certainly I think the Devils are going to have a lot more. I would think would have a lot more trouble playing the Canes than they did playing us. But yeah, I could see them, the Devils, actually winning the series. The thing, as far as the goaltending goes, though, I got to be honest. I'm not really. I know Schmid came in and played admirably, but I'm not ready to consider him an X factor against other teams because I really don't think the Rangers challenged him shot quality wise. Also, as far as providing screens or what's called screen or traffic in front, things like that. I don't think they made life very difficult for him. I thought, he's not a bad goalie. He's obviously a very good goalie, but I think a team that's a little more in your face and a little more slot shot driven, could solve him solve him almost, and we did solve him in Game 6 pretty well, so that was good. And then as far as the other series goes, in the East, Toronto against Florida, I think, both teams are coming off round one victories. I think if that series was a round one series, then I would pick Toronto pretty heavily. But I think now that Florida, has dethroned the Bruins and not only done that, but actually developed some cohesiveness, a good game. They have some momentum going in, things like that. I think that makes them a better opponent than they would have been if they were playing them fresh off the regular season. But given all that, I would say in a long series, it'll probably go to Toronto, but you just never know. And to be honest with you, other than a few highlights here or there, I really didn't follow much what's going on in the West. So Wyatt, I'm going to have to defer to your predictions on that because I just caught things here and there. I don't feel like I'm qualified to actually make a sound prediction on those games.
Okay, well, out at the West, I would love to see a final with Seattle and Vegas in the conference final. That would be a neat with two recent expansion teams playing each other in the finals.
That's a really good point. I wonder. It makes me wonder, like the last time that happened, like Philly was the first expansion team to win the Cup in the 70s, and I wonder. I don't remember if they played did they play St. Louis or I forget who they played in the finals of those two. Of their two cups. But yeah, that's probably, you got to go back, I would think, that far before you start talking about, two expansion teams meeting up and
that's right.
Laying around, you know what I mean?
Have to check that out. Okay, gentlemen, I thank you very much. It was a very interesting chat we had. We'll have to see how we do. Like I said, thank you for coming on short notice. I thought we would have more time between the end of the first series and the beginning of the second series, but we don't. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time. And thank you for listening. And we'll be on again soon. Thanks for tuning in the Retro Rangers podcast. My guests have been Marc Weissman and Wyatt Unger. And I thank you both for coming on. All right? Have a good one. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.